Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, a That Nerdy Site show and the internet's #1 James Bond rewatch show, hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. Join us as each week we dive through a new James Bond film from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Welcome to Scotland.
I knew it was going to be something good, this one. Yeah, there are a lot of great
There
pulls.
were a lot to pull from. That was the first one I was like, oh, I need to jot down a line.
Get one of these, yeah.
Let me go ahead and write this one down.
Yeah, I got 30 minutes left here.
I could have gone. I guess I could have gone with the first introduction of the F word in Bond with M saying like, "I really fucked this up, didn't I?" or whatever,
Yeah, right.
whatever she says. But yeah, that was the first one I thought to write down. Was like, oh, that's a good line from Kincaid.
Yeah. Yes, this week, myself and Trev are talking, of course, about Skyfall, which is the 23rd James Bond film, and also the 50th anniversary Bond film, as they reference themselves at the movie's credits. Trevor, you've seen this one before. It's a Daniel Craig film you've seen before.
Yep.
What are kind of your memories of Skyfall?
As we touched on last week, I'd seen Casino Royale, and then word of mouth on Quantum of Solace wasn't great, so I didn't bother seeing that one. And then word of mouth on Skyfall was through the roof, so I was like, I'll go check this one out, I guess. And I appreciated it, like it completely like just abandons the quantum storyline and just does its own thing. So it was like okay, I didn't feel like I wasn't missing anything, having missed the last movie going into this one. And I really enjoyed it. I think it is a stellar examination of the Bond and M dynamic, like first and foremost. Javier Bardem was like a great villain that I don't know if I ever went back and like rewatched it until this viewing. So it was one of those like, we're an hour and something into the movie before he shows up, and I'm like, oh god, I forgot just how much of this movie is like just even before him. But like I remembered the setup that like Eve at the beginning is going to be Moneypenny, and like kind of, I think I appreciated more the payoff of that because you get like in the middle of the movie you get this really like classic Bond Moneypenny dynamic scene, that I was like, that's like anybody that didn't know going into it, and I feel like they also kind of like let that slip before, like it wasn't like it was a thing that they kind of spoiled in the in the press leading up to it or whatever. But it was a fun reveal. I love the subversion of the Bond and Q dynamic, with it being a younger tech, savvy Q, compared to obviously the many years of an older Q. And so we got like a fun kind of role reversal there. And then in particular, just like I think all of the Bond and M stuff that really kind of highlights the third act of the film, is just some of the best like emotional Bond beats over the course of the series, as well as just like, hey, let's do Home Alone but in Scotland with Bond. Makes for a lot of fun too. So I think lots of fun.
I talked in the kind of since the Pierce Brosnan era started, right? That kind of my like golden age of me being like really into Bond, not just really like I am now, was really kind of those years from like 99, like What Is Not Enough, all the way up until like this movie in 2012 with Skyfall, right? Like the 50th anniversary, and I think so much what this movie does as kind of a celebration, a culmination in a lot of ways of like the Bond series and mythology and kind of what it does in that aspect. And obviously how the movie ends, which we will of course get into, that this to me, especially watching it again now, very much has like some elements of like end game feel to it. Just like it's such a good stepping off point, right? To just be like, and we're done, right? And obviously we'll get into the trivia a little bit where like this, Daniel Craig originally envisioned this as his last Bond movie. It would of course not be, but I think when you view it in that way, it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense just viewed even without that context of like, oh, this is a pretty good ending for his 3-film run as James Bond. They'd go to the next person afterwards. And so I think, at the time it was such like, I remember sitting honestly just gobsmacked in the theater, right? Like Casino Royale had started it, obviously, and I think, to be fair to Pierce Brosnan and some of his movies, had kind of started to put the pieces in motion for what this movie did in terms of Bond's mythology. But like Skyfall did so much stuff, and I was blown away by. And I still think it would have been like a really, if they, I never want them to stop making Bond movies, but if they did, this would have been a hell of a last one to end on. And so this is kind of like the heyday of that, and what a great what a great movie. Let's run through the cast and crew here. It's a pretty small one, actually. Even when I looked at the Wikipedia page, even I looked at like the one and like the official giant big Bond book I've got, right? Like, there's not a lot of major named characters in this movie.
Yeah,
of real importance.
They really made the gun, or the how many people got killed in this one really easy for you.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, which is sort of nice. And so, yes, we have Daniel Craig back as James Bond for the third time here. We have Javier Bardem. We're going to rant and rave about him in a minute. As Silva or Thiago Rodriguez. Ralph Fiennes or Fiennes. I feel like I've heard it both ways, so I never know.
I believe it's
myself. It's Fiennes. Right?
I believe it's Ray Fiennes.
Right, yeah. As Gareth Mallory. Naomi Harris in her first appearance as Eve Moneypenny. Roy Kinnear is back as Bill Tanner. Bernice Marlowe is here as Severine. Ben Whishaw makes his first appearance as Q. We've got Albert Finney as Kincaid. And then Dame Judi Dench makes her seventh and final appearance as M. And this would be the first of 2 Bond films directed by Sam Mendes. It's a hell of a cast, though.
Yeah, another element of like like seeing this the first time. Like, obviously, me coming in to Bond with GoldenEye meant that like Judi Dench had always been my M. And so like this was and that she was the only holdover between the original and then the old series and then the reboot. Made this such like a weird like kind of just an end point to that as well, to kind of like bookend my coming in with GoldenEye all the way up to Skyfall, and just like her being the constant over the course of that. And so I appreciated that like they set things in motion for where the series would go beyond her once she was gone, with the introduction of the Mallory character and stuff. But yeah, that was just another thing I remember. Like, I think probably Judi Dench got like as much, if not more, raves and reviews than Daniel Craig in this one. Like, especially because it was easily the most we'd ever gotten from an M in a movie, or basically any non-Bond character in any of these movies. And the idea that we've talked about before as well of a non, like the Bond femme fatale kind of thing being mostly sidelined in this, and the relationship is Bond and M being like the stellar standout of this as well.
Yeah, I think we'll get into it more in the next 2 movies, but I really like what they do with Mallory's character as the new M kind of down the line, obviously, just as a almost juxtaposition to Judi Dench's M, right? Or even Bernard Lee's M, right? Like another obviously long-lasting one in terms of like how his M evolves and grows, or not, doesn't grow in some ways over time, right? In particular, what they do in No Time to Die, a movie also very obsessed with aging and the end of things. But that's for 2 movies from now. In the Blast from the Past section, we've got a brand new president. Barack Obama is the new president of America for the first time in a Bond movie. And the prime minister is also new. We've got David Cameron over there in the UK. Trevor was all of 27 years old, and I was 20. This movie came out 10 years ago.
That's so weird to realize this came out 10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And a personal favorite, a YouTube channel talking about Oreos, comics, and Portillo the Wiener Dog called Game Over Greggy was started. It would eventually grow into Kind of Funny. God bless. 10 years ago of that as well. It was also mad. It was also very crazy because I did some research. I was like, I'm pretty sure it was 2012. And so I went back to like some of the oldest videos and I was like, God, like, what a weird, trippy, nostalgic blast that was as well. Of it being a decade of that.
Yeah, they didn't rebrand to Kind of Funny until end of
2014.
End of 2014.
2015, right?
And then they left IGN and like
2015,
Kind of Funny full time. 2015.
Yeah, 10 years of that channel. Again, syncing up with Skyfall in lots of fun ways. The 3 highest grossing movies for the year were The Avengers, the first one, Skyfall, and The Dark Knight Rises. So 20-year-old Logan was living his best life out there. All it was missing was Star Wars. Otherwise, I'd have been set.
That was a hell of a summer.
It was. That's like the thing. Like, and it's so. Yeah, like it is one of the best years, I think, for just like being a fan of like pop culture shit. Like it was a great, because also Amazing Spider-Man was also that year as well. And so we were not bereft of great movies. Also, I believe First Avenger was the last Marvel movie before Avengers 1. So that might have come out in 2012 or that might have been late 2011, but it was a great year either way. In the trivia section, at 143 minutes, Skyfall clocked in as the second longest Bond film up to that date, 1 minute shorter than Casino Royale. Skyfall was released as part of the 50th anniversary of the James Bond film series. As such, the film delved into various elements of the Bond mythos here, be they the reintroduction of Moneypenny and Q, the classic Aston Martin DB5, or James's own family history, to even references to exploding pins. I assume we watched the same Blu-ray DVD which
had
like the 50th anniversary celebration thing.
Yeah.
And so they also did interviews with all of the James Bond actors, sans Sean Connery. They pulled in old 30-year-old footage for him because he doesn't like to talk about James Bond. And they also had behind-the-scenes features. Basically, all the behind-the-scenes Blu-ray features you see on all the Blu-ray sets were made for this 50th anniversary celebration, and then they just threw in Spectre 3 years later, which is particularly fun. But it was a big, giant celebration. Yeah,
it was like this one, like seeing that like trailer for the 50th anniversary box set thing at the like that's. I'm pretty sure maybe all the other stuff was like for the 40th anniversary, but like the fact that every other like every pre-Craig like DVD or Blu-ray in the box set that we have that was basically everything up through Spectre has like the same look and feel, and then like once you get to the Craig era, it's like, oh, they were just doing all sorts of weird things with their respective Blu-rays and stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, there was a nice consistency and uniformity to everything kind of up to that point, and then it's just like, god damn it, now I have to figure out like where do I need to navigate to throw subtitles on. Damn it.
It was really jarring, like when I put in Casino Royale, because that was also the first one that I'd watched with Shravia in 12 weeks, right, since the Connery era, right? And so I put that in and was like, what the hell? And I put in the wrong Casino Royale DVD for a second, and like I had to like be like, wait, no, this is the Blu-ray, like it's just different, right? And then Quantum and Casino Royale didn't have any, but Quantum and Skyfall also had like trailers before the movie started too. And I was like, what is, like, this is such a weird, like, there's no, we're just doing whatever we want now for the Craig era kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a trailer for this one for some Chris Hemsworth movie I did not know was ever a thing, like Red Dawn, I think. Like trailer comes up, I'm like, what the heck? Like there's a flash in the pan. That movie did not take off in the way that Universal or whoever thought it was going to.
It was also, for me, it was in Skyfall, there was one, like, it might have been the same movie, but Bruce Willis was in it, and I was like, what is this?
Oh, yeah, no, that was The Last Day to Die Hard. That one I remember, A Good Day to Die Hard. I remembered that one coming out and just being absolutely terrible.
Justin Long?
No, that was it. This one was the one
The
where
one
Jai
after
Courtney plays Bruce Willis's son.
Son.
Yeah,
Yep, that's all I
they're
need to
like
hear.
in Russia or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So I might be wrong. I might have mixed
Movie's
up the
real
names
bad.
or something like that. But yeah, it was like a oof. This is
Real bad.
that series just fell off a cliff.
It did. Continue to run through the trivia. The decision to make James Bond Scottish was made by Ian Fleming after seeing Sean Connery in the role of James Bond. Fleming introduced this in the novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It is also where he established the backstory of Bond's parents and that his father, Andrew, was from Glencoe, Scotland. Skyfall Lodge itself was located in the exterior shots filmed in real life Glencoe, Scotland as well. The film marks the sixth appearance of the classic DB5 within the series. First appearing in Goldfinger in 1964, it instantly became Bond's most iconic car. It then was in Thunderball as well, and then would leapfrog all of Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton, sorry guys, and Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig would each get it in multiple of their movies. This is a particularly fun one. Hashima Island, the site of Thiago Rodriguez, aka Raul Silva's lair, is a tiny deserted industrialized island situated off the southwest coast of Japan, 9.5 miles from Nagasaki, and running just 480 meters, 0.3 of a mile long, and 160 meters, 1/10 of a mile wide. The small isle is one of 505 uninhabited islands in the Nagasaki prefecture. The isle is also known as Ghost Island. The island was last significantly inhabited in 1974 and was once a thriving coal mining community. The island is notable for its character due to its seawall and its untouched, abandoned, and derelict concrete buildings. It's also one of the coolest scenes in the movie, I would say. Just such an eerie location that would have made Ken Adams proud. So we love that. The porcelain bulldog seen on M's desk and gifted to Bond at the film's end were originally designed during World War II to inspire patriotism during the Blitz. So a nice little homage to the Empire's glory days as well. Daniel Craig performed many of his own stunts in the film, including, maybe most outrageously, the opening fight atop the train, which was going 31 miles an hour. Daniel himself had expressed worry about the production's delay, with Skyfall taking place when he was 43 to 44 years old, and that he was already getting too old for the extreme physical demands of being James Bond. In order to get into shape for each movie, he would start training 6 months before filming, and after filming each day, he would work out for another 2 hours. That just sounds awful. Shout out to Hugh Jackman, who also understands being an old guy having to do all this crazy shit. The director and producers briefly flirted with the idea of casting Sir Sean Connery in the role of Kincaid as the gamekeeper at Skyfall. Ultimately, director Sam Mendes thought it would be too distracting and take viewers out of the movie. This is the one I wanted to pause on, because I've heard this for 10 years. I've knew about it for 10 years. I talked about it at the time. And I feel like my opinions swing back and forth in it a lot. Every other day I'm like, I think it would have been a really cool, again, kind of full circle moment. And then part of me is like, I don't know, like it would have probably been really hella distracting, and it would have been like that weird, like, mythology canon breaking moment of like, well, this isn't what's happening right now.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to hear your thoughts on the potential of Sean Connery having been played or playing Kincaid.
I think if they had leaned into that he was just a former Bond and they had done that thing of like James Bond is a code name, not like the person's name,
the person.
And they had somehow found a way to tie it to that, I think it would have been a cool, interesting thing to examine.
Right.
Like retired old Bond meeting new Bond. But like as Kincaid, the gamekeeper from his childhood, just happens to be somebody who we iconically know as James Bond, would have been really weird and would have, I think, taken me out of the movie. It like it's the kind of thing that like in a lot of like legacy sequels and stuff they do these days, or reboots or whatever, they throw in like the other person as like a
Leonard
cameo.
Nimoy in Star Trek. Yeah.
I think Leonard Nimoy is probably like the best case scenario of doing that, where you're having the character play themselves. Yeah. But like I'm thinking like most recently maybe like Uncharted, where you have like Nolan North in an extended cameo as just a guy on a beach, and even that's like distracting to a degree if you don't know the games and you're just watching this. You're just like, what's the deal with that guy? Why was he? But if you're a fan of the games, it's like, cool, that's a fun little thing to see him in the movie. Or like I guess like another one recently would be like Mulan, Ming-Na Wen being like just kind of like a miscellaneous background side character that pops up is a cool nod to her being the voice of Mulan originally. But I think if she had been like the emperor or something like that, that would have been, or even like Mulan's mom, that would have been like weird, because it would have been like, well, she was the original one kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes doubly so in Bond, which does have like, 40 years of their lineage was one continuous timeline, and then they did a very hard reboot, so it would have been it just would have been weird having Sean. Like it would have gotten a pop for sure, but it would have been weird. Oh God,
I can't imagine.
I think for the extent that he is in the third act of the movie, it would have been very odd and been like, okay, this is just weird.
We should also make clear that Sean Connery was at this point in time had retired. Retired after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
That's the other thing. I don't think he would have actually come back and done it anyway, even if they'd like really reached out, unless they just gave him a shit ton of money.
So there is that element of it. He's also 82 years old, and then I think those are actually the lesser concerns. The fact that he was retired, the fact that he was 82, that means nothing. The bigger issue is that I don't think Sean Connery would have said yes, not for those reasons, but because of his long documented antagonism to really specifically the Broccoli family. Because when they're not involved, like from Russia with Love video game, where you can just hang out with developers all day and record lines, he's fine with it. But yeah, he didn't come back for the 50th anniversary, like behind the scenes Bond on Bond shit. He very noticeably did not. His footage is from 30 years earlier. In all of his like Blu-ray movies, when they would do like behind the scenes, like, how it was made things, he's either not in most of them, or the one or two he is in, again, is also 30, 40-year-old footage in some cases. Like he just had a very, fractured relationship, we'll say, with the series. In some ways, sort of fit in with Daniel Craig's own tumultuous relationship with the Bond series. But it'd have been very jarring. And I think while I would have loved the idea of it, I think it would have done no one really any service, right? Like, it wouldn't have benefited Sean Connery. I think it wouldn't have benefited Daniel Craig, who was able to make this own character that is in so many ways inspired by Sean Connery and Timothy Dalton's takes. And so I'm glad. I think ultimately it didn't, especially if they had gone the route of the codename, because that is my number one least favorite Bond like fan theory. I hate the codename theory. So yeah, I'm glad they just had it be Kincaid.
Yeah, I will also say, like, I think so much of the buzz around this movie is, singing its praises, and that would have just been like a distraction from all of the greatness around it. Like that clearly wasn't actually needed. Yeah. So I think, especially if you throw in this weird like little, because there's like a almost a hint of romantic like attraction, at least from Kincaid, maybe towards M. So like that would be a whole other weird dynamic if you had a former Bond, potentially infatuated with M or something. Yeah, I'm glad they didn't do it. I'm glad. I'm glad none of that worked out.
Sean Connery and Judi Dench in a movie together, but not this one. And so that kind of takes us to the wrap up and kind of reception of the film. Spoiler, very popular. Skyfall was a massive success and received critical acclaim. The film received several awards, including 2 Oscars, 2 BAFTAs, and 2 Grammy Awards. Well on its way to an EGOT there. It was the first ever Bond film to gross over $1 billion worldwide, en route to becoming the 7th highest grossing movie ever at the time, the all-time highest grossing film in the UK, the 2nd highest grossing movie of 2012, and the series' highest grossing movie ever, both unadjusted and adjusted for inflation. breaking, it should be mentioned, Thunderball's near 50-year-old series record when adjusted for inflation.
That's also especially, I was just going to say, it's especially impressive given the 2012 that I've already discussed. Like the fact that it's second only to Avengers at the global box office is like wildly impressive.
At the time, Avengers was the third highest grossing, or did it?
It was
Titanic. Was it either second?
No, it was the third. It was behind Avatar and Titanic.
That's what I thought.
But it was the biggest blockbuster success that we'd seen in a number of years. And it was obviously like the template for the superhero movie and the Marvel, the MCU-ification of movies that we've had in the last 10 years. Was really like coming to a head there, and was just it was off to the races. And so like the fact that even that it beat out even Dark Knight Rises, which was the end of this iconic trilogy, which like obviously a lot of people look at Rises as a step back after the incredible Dark Knight, but like you would still expect that like people coming off of how hot Dark Knight was would have shot that through the roof, compared to people coming off of how lukewarm Quantum of Solace was, and seeing Skyfall, shoot up there.
I think it's a testament to just the incredible like word of mouth around this film, right? Like it brought people who weren't necessarily Bond fans like you into the theater to see it because of just how much people were talking about it. It would go on to gross over £100 million at the UK box office, a historic first in the UK, breaking Avatar's record. Critically, the film is arguably even more popular. The film is among the 5 most critically well-received Bond films on Rotten Tomatoes. The film has a universal acclaim rating on Metacritic. In addition, a number of critics, including Kate Mirror of the Times, The Observer's Philip French, and IGN and now RKG's own Daniel Krupa, that was the one I'm particularly happy about, all raving over the film and dubbing it the greatest Bond film ever produced. Outlets like Irish Independent, Daily Record, and The Telegraph also all named it the greatest Bond film ever, and the film also ranks first on Screen Rant's list of the greatest Bond movies. Particular praise is once again heaped on Daniel Craig's Bond, with reviewers and critics alike noting that he had managed to get out of the shadow of Sean Connery, and Daniel Krupa stating that Craig's Bond was, quote, a defining performance for a great actor, end quote. Movies are popular. Pretty much anything you're ever going to see among Bond rankings and series reviews and lists and everything is always going to have this in the top 5. Most have it in the top 3. And it is, I would say, probably now the new most popular pick for the best Bond movie. Although you really can kind of pick out of a hat between this, Casino Royale, and Goldfinger, and you'll probably get one of the 3 being the winners. But I would say probably the most popular pick now, if by a hair. That takes us to the 70-second recap. I clocked this one in. Trevor, you ready for this? At 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So we'll see.
I was going to say, this is by far the longest one that you've ever done.
There's a lot of plot in this one. There's a lot of, I don't feel bad about it. If anyone's got to go extra long, I'm fine with it being Skyfall. So
yeah, I'll say now that you've been through it once, you said 250 is what you had. I'll say you'll hit closer to 240 on a second pass.
Okay. I'm excited. Here we go. James Bond walks into camera focus and into a room seconds after a gunfight. He attempts to save a wounded agent before being ordered away by M and picked up by Eve. An enthralling car and then motorbike chase ensues before Bond and the baddie end up on top of a train, battling it out before M orders Eve to take a shot, which he does as Bond is shot and plummets to the water below. 3 months later, Bond is presumed dead. M is being pressured to retire by Intelligence and Security Chairman Gareth Mallory, and Bond is in an alcohol and pill-induced stupor. After an attack on MI6 leaves 6 dead, Bond stirs and makes his way back to London, where M assigns him to take the test and return to the field. A visibly still recovering Bond performs poorly, but is sent out anyway by M over Mallory's objections. Bond travels to Shanghai, gets in a trippy, lit-up nighttime fight, meets Severine, gets a close shave from Eve, and then sails out to meet Severine's boss. Silva makes an instantly iconic introduction, just oozes a sinister charm and creepiness to him, and confronts Bond about M, his history, and failings before forcing James to attempt to shoot a shot glass off Severine's head. James misses, and then Silva kills Severine. Bond takes out Silva's guards, and then reveals the MI6 forces ready to take Silva in. M confronts Silva, who reveals he endured 5 months locked up before a failed attempt to take the cyanide M had given him. The attempt didn't kill him, but did disfigure him and fuel a passion for revenge. Silva escapes, throws a subway train at Bond, and attacks M at a parliamentary committee hearing. Mallory saves M, Bond clears out the rest of the goons, and then takes M and drives off. After picking up the old DB5, James and M head out to Scotland and Bond's ancestral home of Skyfall Lodge. We meet Kincaid, the old gamekeeper, as we dive into the family history and mythos of James, before the final operatic fight between Bond, Kincaid, and M against Silva's forces. After destroying the DB5 and burning and then blowing up the home, everything comes to a head in the old Bond family church. With the graves of Bond's parents, Andrew and Monique, outside, Silva confronts M, James kills Silva, and then watches as M dies in his arms. Afterwards, we get a perfect shot of James on a rooftop in London with British flags abreeze. Eve gives James M's Union Jack Bulldog and reveals her last name is Moneypenny. And then James steps into M, Mallory's new office, which is a classic M's office from the 60s and 70s, as we come full circle and the film ends.
242.
Hey, you're right. Trevor, how many were killed?
So right on top of that, you quoted in the breakdown that 6 were killed in the explosion. I'll point out that it was actually 8 were killed in the explosion of MI6. They specifically call that out. Final tally of this one is 61 kills. Of those 61, Bond has 26. And then the runner-up in the murder spree here is Raul Silva with 14. So how many of Bond's 26 kills were notable named characters?
He kills Patrice, who I think is the one that was going to try to trip me up, the guy from the train, and then he kills in Shanghai. And then he kills Silva, and then Silva doesn't have any henchmen. He doesn't kill Severine. Silva does. So I'm going to say James kills 2 named characters.
That is correct. Those are the only 2. Everybody else just unnamed henchmen. Running through all of those kills. Yeah, he doesn't kill anybody until Patrice in Shanghai. And shout out to that fight. We were going to definitely talk about that.
We're definitely going to talk about that.
In the scene they've dubbed "What a Waste of Good Scotch." After Silva kills Severine, Bond forces one of Silva's men to shoot another. Shoots Silva's men. Uses one of Silva's men as a human shield, and then just shoots. Yeah, basically just kills kills 4 of Silva's men in that sequence, and then we go into the Skyfall assault, where over the course of that Skyfall assault, he kills 22 people. 3 of Silva's men with the Aston Martin's machine guns. He shoots a bomb with Aston Martin machine guns, blowing up one of Silva's men. His floorboard dynamite trap blows up one of Silva's men. He kills 2 of them with a shotgun. He shoots another 2 with, I think, like the AK he picks up from one of them or something. And then when he lights the propane tank fuse, causing it to explode and crash into Skyfall, the explosion kills 9 more of Silva's men. And then Bond kicks one of Silva's men hard in the face, breaking his neck as he chases after.
I guess
that's a disputable one, but and then he the last non-named character is when he kills the guy underwater with his legs. Bond very very murdery in this one, but all with a whole bunch of henchmen, nameless and
generic
faceless
people.
Yeah.
Trevor, how'd you like Skyfall?
Oh, still real good. Still a really good movie. I watched this a couple nights ago, and like I said, I don't think I've probably watched this since seeing it in theaters. And It was surprising how many like just instantly iconic moments this movie had that I like so vividly remembered them a decade later. From that the Shanghai fight, again, I think, iconic. The shootout between Silva and Severine, and Bond, with Severine, and that location that you kind of already shouted out as just like this haunted ghost
Incredible,
town kind of thing. um the opening sequence, like, I very much remembered like Bond using the crane to, latch on to the thing, and then just very calmly like adjusting his tie and and
hmm
continuing to walk on. um and obviously the iconic image of Bond getting shot and falling off the train, where
yeah.
he easily died like 2 or 3 times in in that sequence. um uh yeah, all the Bond and M stuff is great. I love what they do and how they kind of approach Q in this one,
hmm
and the kind of battling um, ethos between those two characters in here. Um, Shout out to Q's Scrabble mug. Gotta give some love to that. Um, yeah, so just so many like iconic images and like visceral moments that came flooding back as I was watching this one. Great time, yeah. It was a delight. And the creepy like long Silva walking up kind of thing that
Yeah.
you'd already alluded to. Like I remember at the time reading like trivia about how they like built that room that specific length so that
Yeah.
he could like do the casual walk over the length of that monologue, and just being like, that's just like Sam Mendes was like a great choice for
Yeah.
this film. And I wouldn't have necessarily like pegged him for it based on his, his prior history and stuff like,
hmm
American Beauty and stuff like that being, I
Burger
think, probably the,
position.
the
Yeah.
biggest thing he was known for at the time. It was definitely I remember when he got announced as like the next Bond director, people were like, that's a weird choice, but okay.
hmm
And it paid off in spades, largely because when you get, aside from all of those, the cool action stuff they do in this, you do at the core, you have these great scenes between Bond and M, in a significantly elevated version over the scenes that we had in Quantum of Solace between Bond and Camille, that we like,
hmm
that both of us kind of commented, like, when those two were just able to kind of like act with one another,
Yeah.
there was some really cool stuff there. But it was bogged down by shoddy action kind of throughout the rest of the film. This action doesn't necessarily take a back seat, but it's a much more like cohesive kind of like, I can very clearly understand what's going on,
Yeah.
when I'm meant to be kind of focusing on in every moment of the fights. Um, or if I'm disoriented, a la like the fight in the Shanghai sequence with the lights and all the glass reflections and stuff, it's very intentional because they're both very disoriented from that fight because of
Right.
of how it's shot and everything like that. So, um, yeah, just a lot of real good stuff in this. And then I appreciate that they do kind of like set up the like, if this was going to be Daniel Craig's last one, they set up some things that could carry over into whoever the next Bond is, with a new
hmm
M, with Moneypenny, with Q kind of being
Q.
established here, and they could go back to a, let's do a gadget friendly, take on this kind of stuff. But it also, clearly works that Craig did stay on, maybe less so in Spectre, but by the time No Time to Die, comes along, I appreciated having those familiar faces that had already been established.
I think Skyfall is incredible, right? Yeah. I mean, I know for sure I haven't seen this movie all the way through since it came out in theaters, which is an incredible thing to say. It is probably one of the Bond movies I hadn't seen in the longest, because obviously that's, as we talked about, been 10 years now, and partially because it was just like, that was just like a perfect viewing of the movie when I saw it, and I was like, I just don't want to necessarily go back to it. I think it's just an incredible film. I think it is such a smart, clever thing, and one of my favorite things about the Daniel Craig era of Bond is how you see ideas that the Bond series first had, in some cases, decades ago, but just they couldn't execute on it either fully, or they didn't nail the execution, or they just couldn't commit to it 100%. Really be committed to 100% in this movie, and it pays off so well, right? Like, the idea of not having a Bond girl, right? The Bond girl's in here is something that like other Bond movies have like flirted with and then like introduced one late on, right? Or like had stuff like Roger Moore's Bond and Fears Only, right? And Melina there, and they have a much more almost like paternal relationship. And then because it's 1980s and we need to have Bond have sex at the end, we're just gonna kind of hurriedly put them together in like a romantic sense, right? And this movie didn't do that, right? We didn't have a Denise Richards come in because our other Bond girl is the bad guy, right? Like, it's like, no, like, it's okay. We're just going to savor it, right? I think really committing to the idea in GoldenEye of like M and Bond's relationship and this more kind of introspective look at the two of them that we get in that one just great scene in GoldenEye. And they were like, what if we just give that an entire movie to like linger and be fleshed out more and more and more? And it pays so much dividends here, right? I think.
In that vein, real quick, I want to jump in. We haven't done this in a while of like the earmuffs moment or whatever you called it.
Yeah.
I will say like the way they handle Severine in this is easily the weakest element of the film, both in that they very clearly set up that she was, suffered child trafficking, sex trafficking as a kid, and then Bond just shows up behind her naked in a shower in a very rapey, potentially scene. She's ultimately into it and fine, but it's still like, this is the absolute wrong way to approach that kind of trauma survivor. And then the fact that she is just kind of used as a prop in the pissing contest between Bond and Silva is ultimately like it does what they're trying to do of show Silva is, a remorseless bad guy kind of thing, but it's also like they fridge her in a very like just disappointing way for the highest highs that everything else in this movie is that is a notable like that they could have done just so much better with that character.
I don't disagree at all. But I think, like you said, so much else of this movie works wonderfully, right? Like, I think Sam Mendes was such an inspired and bold choice, right? And I think exactly the right pick for this kind of Bond movie, right? Like, it felt like they just said, make a Bond movie, and he just kind of got like all the tools in the tool shop. They didn't really give him too much direction, and it's fantastic because of it. I think right, we'd kind of penalized earlier Bond movies for just feeling like they have random action scenes in there, and I think it helps because Quantum of Solace is right before this, and there are so many just random action scenes in that movie for no reason. And this one, I think, used its action far more sparingly, but to far, far greater effect, right? Virtually every single action sequence in the movie is iconic to me, right? Like, whether it's the opening chase, the tunnel sequence, or obviously the final, like, spectacular battle at Skyfall Lodge, like, they're all so well done and so well put together. And one thing we haven't talked about at all is I think Roger Deakin's cinematography in this film is phenomenal. And in a person who is arguably the best living cinematographer, this is easily one of his finest works. He just gets so much to do in these like spectacular vistas or haunted cities or this kind of like ominous location with Skyfall in Scotland. Like, he just works wonders. And, the Twitter account One Perfect Shot is one of my favorite Twitter accounts because it's just like, here are really beautiful film shots. And the one I always think of that they did early on is just the shot, of Bond on the rooftop with the flags waving in the breeze. And it is like the most James Bond shot possible. And one of the elements of Skyfall I really love is how much this movie commits to the idea, again, that had first been introduced in GoldenEye of like, what is the point of defending the British Empire when the British Empire doesn't exist anymore, right? When Britain is becoming this like hollow shell, right? And I think in some ways this movie has the benefit of what happens in the ensuing 10 years within England, right? With it becoming just increasingly more like introverted and collapsing in itself, right? And like leaving the EU and having to like slash its like foreign service budgets because obviously leaving the EU didn't work out and all this kind of stuff. And like England leaving the world in some ways. And so I think Skyfall kind of works as like this really smart kind of forward-looking movie in terms of like this is just what England's future is going to be if they're not careful. And like
you've just made me wonder if like the next one is going to touch on Brexit, like, and it's just going to be like the next Bond is a very direct like Brexit inspired or Brexit focused
it'd be
kind
such
of
a cool avenue
storyline
to go down, right? Like I think, right, and I think the Daniel Craig Bond movies are all very political, and all much more focused on like the actual world that they're operating in. Obviously, the Casino Royale very influenced by 9/11 and that kind of world. And I think Skyfall does wonders with England, right? It's one of my favorite elements of James Bond as a character is, in the character's, highest of heights in like the 60s was right as the empire was like disintegrating basically. But it was still, we had an empire. We still had colonies in Africa and Asia and everything else. So like it made sense, right? And now it's just like, England is a very different place 50 years later, right? And what does that look like? And what is the need for Bond? And what is the need for MI6? And what is the need for M and all this kind of stuff in this world? And what is the need for England in so many ways is what the movie's kind of asking. And I think this movie does so much for that, right? Like, I love in Goldeneye what it does with like for England James, right? And like that being what motivates James Bond. And this movie does it in a far more personal manner even. I think we can't give enough praise to Daniel Craig's performance in this movie, but we will certainly try. I think it's just fantastic, right? Like I think Casino Royale is a far flashier movie for him, right? To be in, right? And he gets to kind of go on this like big arc kind of from coming from like this like flippin' one-linery kind of like whatever guy to being James Bond by the end of that thing. But I think Skyfall actually gives him way more like dramatic depths to plunge in a far more kind of introspective manner, which I've seen a lot of actors talk about is like actually way more interesting for them to kind of do because it's not as like large enough to have to just kind of convey it in their face and their body language and the way they deliver lines. And I think Craig is just fantastic in that, right? Like one of my favorite reviews, like descriptions of Skyfall that I've heard is, it doesn't have like the best Bond girl. It doesn't have a Bond girl at all. It doesn't have the best henchman. It doesn't have a henchman at all. Like the music, the music is pretty spectacular, but like the villain is great, but like maybe he's not the most iconic Bond villain kind of thing, right? And it's, Daniel Craig isn't my favorite James Bond, but every single thing it does just operates at such a high caliber and all the pieces come together in such a way that I think it is such just incredible performance. And Judi Dench and Daniel Craig and Javier Bardem in particular all give three of the very best Bond performances of any movie all in the same movie. And they're all so tied together. Because like I want to just rant and rave about Javier Bardem, right? Like his introduction I think is full stop the best introduction of any Bond villain, right? Like I can't think of anyone that is as perfect for who that character is. And there were a lot of like think pieces at the time about like the like weird like nature of Javier Bardem's character and whether or not he's like gay or what is happening in that sequence. And 10 years on from that, I find myself loving it, not just for Javier Bardem and how he's performing in that, but how utterly cool and calm Daniel Craig's Bond is there too, right? And with one of the best lines in the entire movie of like, what makes you think this is my first time? Like I think those two actors in particular have such great chemistry and have such great on-screen presence together that you just can't help but just feel utterly captivated anytime they're on screen together, right? And I think that sequence and the long take they give and the fact that Silva's face is like not even in frame until the very last second. The film, like the camera deliberately like cut him off at like the neck, is just so well framed, so well shot, so well staged. And yeah, Silva is just a spectacular Bond villain.
You're saying like in his introduction? I mean,
exactly when he makes that long walk.
He makes the long walk. Like you can see him as he makes the long walk in,
but it's not in like focus,
right? Yeah, yeah.
Kind of like
yeah, because he's in the background, and the focus there is on the foreground. But yeah, it's like obviously I think it is. And we've talked about this before. Like his introduction, yeah, easily like one of the most just like it takes like iconic Bond elements of like, oh, he's gonna do the big bad monologue kind of thing, and it just says like, well, instead of like that being him like sharing his evil plan at the end, let's like put that big bad monologue giving us everything we need to know about this character up front, and give it the motivations and kind of establish like why he's doing the things he's doing, to like we're already an hour into the movie, so let's hit the ground running with him. Tying it back to like how this movie ties into like the world that we lived in at the time. I think there is an interesting element. Obviously, the movie itself is a significantly like personal vendetta that Silva is on. But he's using kind of the broader world around. Like he's using the fact that he now has access to who these agents are and where they're embedded in terrorist organizations around the world. And he's going to use a tool like YouTube to upload that information once a week kind of thing, as which like I remember like basically like that same story beat plot point. I think it's used in like a later Mission Impossible movie. It's just like apparently way too many of these secret organizations just have everything available in like one centralized location for people to steal.
That time, the Nautilus in Mission Impossible.
But I like and there's an element in this movie where like by the time we got to the end, we're doing the Skyfall stuff. There was like a brief bit where I'm like, did they ever like close that thread? Or is like that stuff still going to get like leaked out week after week? And I'm like, oh, I guess they probably like when they captured Silva and got his stuff, they were probably able to like stop all that. But like they don't like that's clearly not the actual focus of the movie. That's what like
sort of
is
like a red herring,
getting everybody's like attention to it. But yeah, like that is like so the fact that Silva did all of that just so that he could be like caught and brought in and have this like masterfully executed plan to get to and try and kill M, as a very personal vendetta kind of thing, is like it's almost the like it is an evolution of what Trevelyan could have been if Trevelyan didn't turn into like just trying to be a big bag bank robber at the end. Like this is still like Silva really is just trying to kill M and face the demons that she kind of imbued in him. And I think that's just a really cool motivation that we don't often get in this series, that is usually about like world altering stakes. And so that was great. And then another thing that we've obviously talked about in the past that I think is a testament to what Daniel Craig is bringing to this movie is that this is the first movie that is letting us explore Bond as a character past his prime, or as an agent who can't do it anymore for a myriad of reasons. He's old. He died, or he got shot, plummeted to his death, and then has been out of the game for a few months, and has some like PTSD surrounding that, in just such cool, interesting ways. From his haunted performance when we see him kind of after those credit sequences, to like his ambivalence towards death as he does the drinking game with the scorpion on his hand. Basically, like, we are introduced to a Bond that like has lost any regard for his own life, and it's not until like he sees that like the country still needs him and that M is under attack, that he like tries to get back into the game, and even there struggles, and struggles like to the point that he shouldn't have been sent out, as as we continue to see throughout. But he, ultimately pulls himself together and does what needs to get done. And I think that is like they do such a good job examining that it would have been a very fitting like end thing, even though he is by the end of this movie ready to get back to work with Mallory in charge, and continue being an agent. The fact that like they did such a good job of examining what that like this is one of the few times we ever see Bond falter and fail, and definitely like one of the few times we see like repeatedly. The only other time like I can remember where like we see Bond showing weakness was Roger Moore coming out of like the G-force machine, and he's like so disoriented after that.
Right.
And
this is only the second Bond movie where he's ever
where he's
shot
yeah.
Thunderball,
Yep.
right? So like it's just
yeah,
he's beat to shit here.
Yeah. And he gets shot like he gets shot a couple times before Moneypenny shoots him.
Yeah.
Like I didn't remember that, like him getting shot in the crane.
Yeah.
And that being like the fact that there's like uranium in that bullet or whatever that he does like that surgery to pull out. Like that was clearly also taking a toll on his body in those 3 months when he was off. So I love that the movie isn't afraid to explore that, and I think that ties in very well to all of the like what is the British Empire now there isn't a British Empire anymore kind of thing.
Right.
To that larger subplot, and to the M versus kind of like the public opinion of the agency and stuff, and her in the hearings kind of having to make the case for why MI6 is still needed, is still why 007 or 00 agents are still a vital resource, because it is a scary unknown world that has drastically changed from even when she took over in 1993-5 whatever it was, in Goldeneye kind of thing. And so I think that the broader themes of the movie are explored very well across multiple storylines, multiple threads, in just like excellent ways. And as somebody who like going into it didn't have any kind of like lineage to like Bond's legacy, and even like outside of it, like if you told me before watching this that like Bond Scottish, I've been like, oh yeah, I guess I remember that like coming up in one of our early, episodes or something like that. But it's such a non-entity, especially of like the reboot era, that like them going to Skyfall and Bond's home and kind of like exploring, his parents' past and stuff, like not even his parents' past, like because they don't really like, apart from a couple name drops and stuff, we don't get like this deep dark history on Bond's parents or something that set them up. This isn't like The Amazing Spider-Man where it's like, oh, there was actually a secret thing that Peter's parents were working on that's going to come into play in movies you're never actually going to see. So it was like it was almost trying to kind of set up that like bigger mythos, it seems. But the fact that it doesn't get bogged down in that, and it does keep it a largely like personal story between the people who actually matter in Bond's life, i.e. M, is a nice thing. Kincaid is like a weird thing at the end where it's just like, I guess that like he largely feels like they just needed a third person there to help get, to help kind of move pieces around the board. Cause like I just sit there wondering like, if this estate has been abandoned for as long as it is, like, why is he still around? why was he just hanging out there at Skyfall when they show up? There's a lot of weirdness. But it's whatever.
He's
Albert Finney's
he's
fun.
He's loyal to the state, like Alfred.
Yeah.
Right. Like I like Kincaid a lot. Actually, he's one of my favorite parts of the movie. I think precisely because he gives us a like physical manifestation of like Bond's past, right, in his childhood. Like they have this 3-decade plus bond, right? Like M is sort of his adult parent figure, right? And Kincaid can kind of serve as like the like childhood parental figure, right, that he had. He is essentially Alfred to Bond's Batman here. and the fact that he's played just so wonderfully by Albert Finney, it's just like, yeah, he's so much fun. The whole like Skyfall sequence, I don't want to get too far into because there's so much I want to get to beforehand, but like I think is easily the strongest part of the movie. But to like peel it back to the very, very beginning, even how the movie begins, again, yet again, for the third time in Daniel Craig era, we're going to have a non-traditional opening. The gun barrel sequence doesn't come until the very end. And it just is like straight up Daniel Craig just like walks into the camera focus and is like such a like jarring, but like really smart way to then just like flip the camera around, almost like you're in like suddenly like a first person video game thing now. And I love it. And that whole car, bike, and then train sequence to begin the movie is just fantastic, and it's so good. And while you don't need actors to do every single stunt, not every actor needs to be Tom Cruise, right, and do crazy stunts in order for it to still be effective, right? Like I think of like a Timothy Dalton quote from when he was Bond about how you have to thread a fine line between like making it believable but not going, that's Timothy Dalton doing this stunt, not James Bond. I think this movie is strengthened so much by how physical Daniel Craig gets in it, right? And that train sequence is a prime example of that, right? Like, if this was a Roger Moore Bond movie, Roger Moore would be sitting like back home in England while they're filming on location that with like 7 stuntmen, right? And like it'd be probably pretty obvious because they're pretty badly done by the end, right? And so I think it is just such a great sequence. The image of him like hopping out from the train and then like doing his tie and keep going is iconic. It's so much fun.
It's
right?
a nice little nod to that Pierce Brosnan underwater adjusting his tie bit.
Exactly, right? Like I think one of the elements for
there
me
are like
that
a lot of
Skyfall
weird
well,
things. Sorry, I was just gonna say there are a lot of weird things where like we talked about like in Die Another Day or whatever, like on the 40th anniversary where they did all these like nods to the past. There for the 50th here, there are a lot of like more subtle nods to the past, and they didn't.
which is what I
They
had
weren't.
said,
Yeah, they weren't trying to make it like a game of like let's put something in from every movie, but there are just so many fun little elements from the history of Bond that kind of like play into this that I certainly have a better appreciation for, having watched everything else up to this point now. But like even if you don't have that, it's still a cool, suave, debonair, cool spy thing to do. Sorry, go ahead. Back to you.
I was just
point.
I mean, like I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself, right? Like I think this movie works on both levels. If you're someone who loves Bond, like I have for years, and there's so much that it's giving you here to work with, and so much that it's doing for like the Bond mythos. And then even if you're someone who this is your very first Bond film for, I think it's still just so spectacular. It's such a great entry point. And yeah, to take it back to like the opening sequence, right? Like I think this movie, even in that opening like 10 minutes pre-title sequence, immediately lets you know that this is going to have like much more of a sense of humor to it, much more of a sense of fun to it than either of Craig's first 2 movies, I think. And like while this is still like very much a drama, they're also starting to allow some of the more fun elements of Bond to kind of be shown here as well. And yeah, like that opening sequence is so good, leading all the way up to obviously Moneypenny shooting Bond and kind of him smashed into the water. The fact that the bad guy gets away, like the fact that like it's a rare pre-title sequence where the bad guy gets away and Bond gets shot, right? Presumed dead by the end of it, right? Like it takes the stakes of Die Another Day and like is like, what if we just take it up to 10? Just shoot him off a moving train into a body of water that then has a waterfall that he falls off of, right? Like let's just like throw him out there, and the bad guy gets away just completely unscathed, right? It's like it's such a smart, clever, bold opening. I love the fact that you just hit the ground running on it, and then we obviously get Adele's fantastic theme that we'll get into later, obviously in the music moments, but like it's just phenomenal. And I also love the actual like credits themselves and the imagery they're using, right? And how like dark and ominous this was. Like when this movie came out, even just like watching that, is like someone's gonna die here, right? Like I was like, I don't know if it's gonna be I don't know if it's gonna be Bond, but like it just has such a sense of like death and like ominous over it that like, and there were like already rumblings on the internet, so I was just like, I don't know what I'm getting into, right? And so it was a little bit of Uncharted 4, of just like, are they actually going to do this kind of thing? And then them actually, pulling the trigger on it, unlike Uncharted 4. Yeah, it's such a great first 15, 20 minutes of the movie right there.
Yeah, I think especially in that pre-title sequence, I remember. Yeah, that's definitely a thing I remember standing out when I watched it the first time, and just like it not being what I remembered of like Bond title sequences of like just nonstop sexy nude
Naked
women
women, right?
silhouettes or something like that, and it was a lot more like examining the themes and the ideas of the
Yeah,
movie, and yeah, like the very prominent focus on graveyards and stuff is very much like, okay, yeah, definitely somebody's gonna die
yeah.
in this. And to that point, you mentioned kind of like Patrice getting away at the beginning, and that being like a an almost unheard of kind of thing, the bad guy getting away. Also in this movie, obviously of note, like the bad guy like achieves his objective, be like
That
that being a first in the in the
that's
Bond
a really
series.
interesting
Like
point too. Yeah,
he's not around to really like appreciate and enjoy it at the end
savor it.
there,
Right,
but
right.
like ultimately, yeah, he does get what he was trying to do of killing M.
Mm.
um and so
Really,
that's
it's a really interesting point I hadn't thought
yeah,
about before.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know there are so many elements of Skyfall that it is just deconstructing the Bond, like how a Bond movie operates, right? Like it's really interesting because the closest Bond movie that I immediately think of when I think of Skyfall, and especially after watching it through again now, is Goldfinger, and how it is just like the other side of that coin of Goldfinger. Because in so many ways, so many of these Bond, tropes and templates and standards that we are talking about for 40 years now all come from that one movie, right? That's where it really established like what a Bond movie is. And Skyfall is saying, well, what if we did those things, but just did them a completely different way? What if we just subverted your expectations? And what if we just like flip them on their head? And it, I think, serves as like a really good kind of other end of the spectrum with Goldfinger. These two great, iconic Bond movies, right, that are among the very best of the series. That one kind of established what a Bond movie is, and the other one said, what if we just completely rebuild what a Bond movie can be and deconstruct all these kind of long established templates, and then we do bring things back in like a Moneypenny, like a Q. We're doing it in a totally different way, and I think you see that throughout the movie so much. It is just this deconstruction of the Bond series templates, and right coming out of the pre-title sequence, I think you see it. I think coming out of the fact that like again the fact the villain succeeds, right? The Bond movie where the villain gets probably the closest to succeeding is certainly Goldfinger's in the running for that, right? Like his plan basically works, if not for 3 seconds away from a bomb going off in Fort Knox, he gets away with everything, and he also escapes until he decides to confront Bond. Like there's so much there too, right? And so I think coming out of the pre-title sequence, and we get to Bond having this death wish, right? Like even there, it ties back into an earlier point I made of like it feels like if they had just let Timothy Dalton's Bond fully commit to it, right? Like fully be what Timothy Dalton had been doing for both of his two movies, which is just like this dude who does just have a death wish and who just doesn't really care if he lives or dies and makes out of it, especially like License to Kill Dalton, where he's just like off the reservation to begin with, right? And kind of doing his own thing. Like this feels very real to like if they'd made a third Timothy Dalton movie, it'd have been very similar to this, right? Like Dalton would have been a similar age for like a third Bond movie if he'd been in one, like his mid 40s, like Craig is here. And I think they could have done a lot of really interesting stuff in that. And so like this sort of feels like what we would have got from a third Dalton movie. And spoiler alert, it would have been rad. It'd have been really good if we'd got another one. And like that is sort of my favorite thing here is that there's so much of like the spiritual legacy of Bond coursing through Skyfall, right? And I think Daniel Craig has made no like secret of the fact, and I think if you've watched the movies like we have now, you can pretty clearly see the DNA from Sean Connery and Timothy Dalton's Bonds, in particular in his Bond, and how he kind of elevates and redefines their style of Bond performance for like the 21st century. I think is super exciting and super engaging to see. I, of course, really want to talk about the like nighttime light battle, which we just kind of alluded to because it's just standout. It's so cool, and it's such a great flip from Quantum, which we each gave so much grief for its poor editing and its quick cuts. And here's an example of a scene that is like silhouetted in night, and just like the muzzle flash is giving light to the things to kind of see what's going on. that in like a lesser director cinematographer's hands is just any generic sequence from Quantum of Solace, right? Of two people fighting. And here, even though you can't see everything, you're given just enough to see what's going on, follow the flow of it, and it's framed so beautifully. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have similar thoughts to me on this.
Yeah. The note that I made on this one is one of the best lit sequences ever, with the shadow. With the shadow existing amidst the neon jellyfish and digital billboard.
It's so good.
And I like, so much of it is in setting up.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
it's the element that we've talked about as well, in like, this is a largely silent fight in terms of like, we don't hear like grunting and stuff like that. This one at least has like an orchestral score to like support the action that's going on, versus some of the weird awkward ones where it's just kind of been nothing. But like, they do so much to set up the location and the tension in the lead up to the actual fight, with like, the Patrice like hearing something behind him, so he turns around but can't see Bond because it's all windows and mirrors and stuff, and so he just sees like the reflection of the jellyfish or whatever instead of Bond in that moment. As a, again, a perfectly framed kind of shot. And Bond is able to use that, all to his advantage. He doesn't he doesn't jump the gun, I guess. And so, some, other guy just dies as a result. But then, yeah, the colors, it's, obviously it predates Blade Runner 2049, but like Blade Runner 2049, another Roger Deakins joint, if I recall correctly. It is like, this is very much like almost his audition reel to Denis Villeneuve for Blade Runner, on like, here's cool things we can do with lighting and color for a very intense sequence like this. In a very high tech, kind of setting and stuff like that. In a world where, like, setting part of your movie in Shanghai is a just like cheap money grab for a Chinese, marketplace, kind of like, trying to like bring in a Chinese audience. This, elevates beyond that and makes a great use of going to that setting, both Shanghai and Macau.
Oh my God, Macau, yeah.
In a way that's like way better than like Transformers is just going to set stuff there just so they can like really be like, hey, look, Chinese market, look at how much of our movie we put in your part of the world. Despite any of it, like, none of it's good, but we've put it here, so please come see our movie. Like, this is really quality sequences that use that setting in very vibrant and evocative ways. And yeah, that like like as soon as like I saw that like blue jellyfish, I was like, oh, I remember this. This is gonna be really cool. And I was not disappointed.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite sequences of Craig's era at the very least. It's just I could talk about Roger Deakins cinematography in this movie all day long. It's just so beautiful throughout, and like that is such a like standout sequence and fight, and it leads right into one of my other favorite sequences that is way more minimalist, which is just Bond and Moneypenny together, and like the shave sequence is just so spectacular. And I read somewhere that like some critics thought that Daniel Craig and Naomi Harris didn't have chemistry together. And to that I say, I don't know what movie they were watching, but it is certainly not the same one, because like that sequence alone has like more electricity and more sparks through it than half of the actual Bond girls throughout the series and their respective Bonds, at the very least. Like, it is so good, and all of their banter back and forth, and like the like Macau casino sequence right afterwards, and like the kind of like earpiece thing again, references to like Casino Royale. Like, there's so much here that I love between these two characters. And like, I think Naomi Harris does so much with not a ton in this movie, but she's just great in every single sequence. And like the shave sequence in particular, and like the dialogue they're given to just kind of play with is just such. It's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. Like I think it is such a great standout sequence for the two actors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the like the teases there that we get there of like, is there going to be a romantic thing between these two?
Like him unbuttoning the top button on his shirt, and then
yeah, is and the intimacy and the closeness of that, you know, that very personal, you know, interaction, especially because it is like, this is the first time we're getting Bond cleaned up in this. Like he's had that kind of that scruff and that like that light beard. You know, nowhere near Pierce Brosnan Die Another Day beard levels, but like it is
fair.
A beard, which we don't typically see on Bond. He is typically like very clean shaven, and here this is him finally getting like fit for duty again, and she's you know, playing a very key role in that, and then I think it does work for me as a great kind of two-hander, with the sequence when they're back in London, and you get, I'm trying to find my note on it, but you get the like the back and forth between them, in the like underground MI6 headquarters that is really, actually I guess it might have been earlier. It might have been before they left. It is before they left, because it's Bond basically saying like, oh, you're not going back out on the field duty or whatever, and I guess I'll feel safer.
For everyone.
And it's very much the like the classic, you know, Connery or Moore with Lois Maxwell like dynamic of, there's very clearly like flirtation and tension there that's not going to be explored, not going to be consummated, but we haven't had that dynamic for this Bond in a way. So I think and even in the Brosnan era, I guess there were a couple with Brosnan and Moneypenny that were like some really good standouts, but I guess there's an element of like, it's one of those things I didn't know I was missing from the movies until it came back in this one, and I was like, oh, that's just a good dynamic for Bond to have. And I think the fact that like so much of this movie is like, he has a couple of kind of like, you know, romantic flings. He has his, you know, partner while he's dead, and then he has Severine, but like obviously the brunt of the Bond female relations in this movie is not of a sexual or romantic nature, does I think show how great that side of Bond can be. And then weirdly, when you throw into the mix of like him flirting with Silva, and kind of having the tension that they have in those moments, and the sly smiles and smirks that they have with one another, it's like, oh, he can do the playboy role, and he's very clearly like, I guess like we get just such a vast array of his like relationships in this one. Like the first one, he is cold and detached. We don't even like really know that woman. Like I think she's credited as like Bond's lover or whatever. She doesn't even have a name, kind of thing. And then Severine is you know, a more traditional kind of like classic. This will be, you know, a one-time thing. And it you know, it falls into that trope of like, you know, Bond sleeps with somebody and then she dies, like that kind of Bond. I hate the phrase Bond girl, so I've tried to actively avoid it, but and this one is, I think, one of the ones where they first started talking about Bond women, so shout out to that, you know, branding change or whatever. But I think the relationship and the dynamic with Severine is there to, and again, in a, you know, not entirely well executed, and it's one of the weaker elements of this movie for me, but it is there to show just how powerful Bond's relationships with women can be when they aren't just about that. And I think, you know, that helps juxtapose Severine against, Eve and against M in very compelling ways. But yeah, like the tease all throughout. Like I'm trying to think if it's one of those. Like I'm pretty sure I probably didn't know it going into the movie the first time. So it probably was a fun little reveal at the end as like one of the last little beats of like, oh yeah, I'm Eve Moneypenny, and and it very much, as you kind of mentioned, like being a very clear nod to like the classic Office setup.
It is the straight up The Office. Yeah,
it's like the one thing
awesome.
It was missing was Daniel Craig throwing a hat onto a hat rack.
Right.
And I would not have been surprised if they, had found a way to try and make that work. I don't think they,
Right.
I don't think it would have worked in a Daniel Craig era kind of thing, but like, they could have found some kind of fun thing to do with it or something. Or
It's
like
funny.
maybe she, like he walks in with a coat and hat or something, and she takes it off, throws it on a hat rack, and takes off the coat or something. But yeah, it's fascinating seeing Bond's relationships with other characters examined throughout this movie.
I think for me, I mean, I agree with all of that, and like in particular, I wanted to emphasize too, like Daniel Craig has never really given an opportunity to play the kind of more playboy Bond of someone like Roger Moore or Pierce Brosnan. I think kind of probably most famously. But when he is given that chance really exclusively in this one movie, right, with kind of his banter with Silva and his banter with Moneypenny, I think you see how skilled he could have been as that kind of Bond, right? Like, I don't think either one of us think that Daniel Craig is a one-note kind of bland, just like always angry Bond. But some people do think that, and I just think this movie gives you so much to prove that that's just such a nonsensical thing to think, right? And like, I think Daniel's charm in that sequence with Silva is so good, right? It to me, it's a great indication too of like, again, the same, panicky, op-eds you get about why Bond can't ever be like gay, for example, are completely disproved there of how good their chemistry is in a just like very flirtatious scene between these two men who are each just so like irresistibly charming and menacing all at the same time with each other. Like I just think Daniel Craig has such a personality and presence to him in this film with all these different relationships, and I think one of the elements I do really enjoy is how they're all so different from one another in both their varying degrees of intimacy, both physical and emotional, and also in their varying degrees of how they kind of each flesh out a different element inside of who Daniel Craig's James Bond is, because by the end you are given such an in-depth view of who this character is in a way that we haven't seen really in any other Bond movie, to kind of the level here.
Yeah.
But yeah, after that, then we get the sequence with obviously Silva, like we talked about. The hallway sequence is fantastic. The scene with Severine, and then that kind of takes us to the like inquiry, Silva pulling out his teeth, which is always a great reveal. And M reading a really great Tennyson poem. That is like so perfect.
The Silva reveal, like I remember, like I think, the CG of that is like one of the weaker elements. I think it is a incredibly cool and like haunting.
Yeah, that's a great
image, and like the backstory of that image is incredible. Like it's a thing. I almost wish they had told us that, and then I wish they had shown us him pulling the thing out, and then just seeing like a horrified look, or seeing like a reverse shot of like, so we see him in silhouette with maybe some kind of deformation in his face now, and we just see M and Bond either react or specifically pointedly not react to what they're seeing there. And then like cut back to him kind of like readjusting and putting it back in. The fact that like we see it and we see like his face kind of cave in and sink on itself and stuff. It's like, it's a cool image in the like, in the lineage of Blofeld's Scar or most recently Le Chiffre's kind of like bleeding eye and stuff like that. But I think like it's a little too uncanny valley CG for me. So it doesn't look right.
Right.
So it's one of those things I love everything about it. I love like that it's, you know, a cyanide capsule gone wrong.
The backstory behind it, oh my god, I love that idea.
And I wish they had found a way. Like, I think it would have been that much more haunting and intense if we hadn't actually seen it and it had just been left to our imagination.
The Jaws effect, right?
Yeah.
The monster you don't see is scarier than when you do. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't disagree with any of that, right? For me, the Uncanny Valley effect doesn't take hold. I do think it works for me. And maybe it's partially just because I think it's one of the single best villain backstory like reveals of any villain. Like, it's such a great idea, right? Because you hear constantly about how like spies have like cyanide capsules either just like on them that they can take if they get captured, or like behind their teeth or in a pin.
And we've seen it in Bond movies before, like in the going all the way back to Dr. No. The guy, like one of the henchmen, you know, pops it and dies.
So I love the idea of like, what if it doesn't work, right? And like the ramifications of that, and the fact that like Silva pointedly didn't take it, just like Bond didn't take it and Die Another Day. For months, for 5 months, for half a year, he didn't take it. And then he finally was just like, you're not coming for me. There's nothing left for me here. I'm not going to give them any information. I'm just going to kill myself to be done with this, right? And then doing that, and just like the way he describes like the like flames inside of me, right? Like the fire, like the way it burned inside of me as it like went through my organs, and I didn't die. Like life clung to me like a disease was the exact phrase. And it's like, what a great line. And like, I think for me, like that build up and then the reveal like makes it work so well. And then like, even more so almost just because like, I like the image of him taken out and I'm like seeing their faces like, yeah, it's good, but like whatever. But it's like him like shoving it back in. And then like when he puts it back in, like just like the drool that comes off his face, like that, like Javier Bardem would have actually had to like drool for that. Like worked really well for me. Just like, oh right, like that's just like a gnarly moment. And then the way that like leads into everyone leaving, you get more great Bond and Q scenes together. And then just like the fact that again, sort of in your just like, I don't want to see it. I just want to like know it's happening. Like the idea that we don't see Silva escape, that we don't see him break out, that we don't see him kill the guards and run in the tunnel, that we just like Bond walks in and it's all happened is like such a great moment, I think. And the look on Bond's like face, his like, oh fuck, like this has gone off the rails, I think is so well done that like I didn't need an actual image of Silva, you know, walking out the door, grabbing a gun, killing the two guards kind of thing.
Yep. And then I like the like escalating like revelations that like clearly he'd been planning this for a while and knew
years, right?
The exact path and knew how everything was going to play out kind of thing to get to where he was going to need to get to. He has like guards that hand him off a police uniform kind of thing. Yeah. He knows exactly where he might need a train to come crash in as a diversion so he can get away from Bond. It's like the only thing he doesn't really account for is that like Bond is a stubborn son of a bitch and will still get there. And I guess he doesn't account for like Mallory pulling.
That's really what it is. Like he's got Bond down to peg. Like he's there minutes before Bond. Everything goes fine if not the fact that Mallory just happens to be there too and like risk his life for him, right? Like otherwise it's done.
Yeah. I love like that's also I think that's a turning point for Bond as well, that I appreciated this time, because like up to this point his marksmanship has been very much in question. And in that sequence I don't think he takes out any of like Silva's guys like in that guard, maybe, but he does like he precisely hits and does like the little wink because he knows he's going to hit the fire extinguishers to provide like smoke and cover for everybody to like in a way that shows us Bond is back. And it's not making a huge deal about it, but it is something that like I caught and found myself really appreciating, because the last time we saw him, I guess he was able to like pretty accurately take out all of Silva's goons after missing horribly in the William Tell moment. but I think they were all like a little closer quarters and stuff like that. This, he's like shooting across a room, and is able to hit with that precision to get the fire extinguishers to do exactly what he needs them to do.
I mean, for me, it was that moment was like 2 minutes earlier, right? Like it's after after he gets Silva and the train crashes down, right, and he survives, right, and then like looks up and is like, oh fuck, like, and then like basically like sprints the rest of the way there, right? And it's that moment of like him given this like the poem reading, as Bond is basically like the personification of what she's reading, right? Like this like old guy who's like, you know, been slowed down by time or everything, but just has the will, right? The will to carry on. And I think those shots of like Bond as M's giving the voiceover as Silva's coming in with his guards and like killing people is like so good. Even like M's sort of throwaway line of just like, you know, my late husband. It's like, oh, we've seen her husband. We've met her husband, right? And to see like that, like an element of like even M is kind of near the end of her own arc here because of her husband's gone now, right? And this whole inquiry. Yeah. And then like how like some of it, despite her best efforts, have sunk in. And it's this really beautiful Tennyson poem that is like such a great capstone for Bond. And again, we're going to come back to poems in Bond 2 movies from now. Hope you like them. But like, I think it is one of my favorite sequences in the entire movie because it is just like all the pieces finally coming together to like have it be like, oh, this is James Bond back now. And then, yeah, him just like bursting through the door right away. And then we kind of get that whole sequence.
Also, shout out to the moment earlier in that chase where he does that thing that I think like every kid has wanted to do ever of sliding down the like escalator, like console center thing or whatever. Which like in most places you definitely can't do that because there are like bumps, you know, along the way to prevent people from doing that kind of thing. But conveniently left out of the London Tube scene for that sequence of
I also just, like that, you know, because
bombarding
Daniel Craig obviously did that himself.
Yeah.
And the fact that like Silva does it and like fucking eats shit. He like fucking smash into the ground. And I love the fact that like you can see Craig like do it, like leap off and like hit the ground running and like very clearly laugh and be like, oh shit, like I had way more speed than I thought. And like I like the fact that it is like him still kind of getting back into the rhythm of things. That whole chase sequence and the inquiry, I think, is also done. It's just M's poem read is one of my favorite scenes of the movie, and then it leads us so nicely, he said, to just Bond stealing her car, driving her to get the DB5, like the line of like, oh, this is much more inconspicuous. The like again gag reveal of like the ejector seat is in this car kind of thing.
Like this.
We're like off to
I love the relationship with gadgets in this one. Of, you know, the initial thing, like the Q branch gets basically name dropped before we even meet Q of them like they have identified somebody hacking into MI, you know, into the MI servers and stuff before MI6 blows up. And then we get the scene between Q and Bond there in the art gallery, kind of sharing their relations, and you know, Q basically be like, I could do more damage in my pajamas before breakfast than you could do in a year with the technology. He's like, well, then why do you need people like me? Because sometimes people we need someone to pull the trigger,
or not pull the trigger,
or not pull a trigger, as Bond points out. And I like it is a, you know, it's a simple, you know, gadget from Q in that he gets the gun with just the palm reader kind of thing, which was a nice, you know, throwback to a much more condensed version of that tool compared to when we saw it in the Dalton era, and the little radio that then comes back to play of like it's the latest gadget. It's called a radio, which then Silva also you know, has his retort that leads to the explosion. But then, like, yeah, clearly this Aston Martin has been decked out with an ejector seat, with machine guns, with a shit ton of bulletproof glass to, you know, last as long as it does in that fight. I think there's a lot of fun there. And yeah, I love I love the relationship and the banter that we get between Bond and Q at this point. The like, oh yeah, go ahead and eject me, fine. But then also, I was just pulling up like some of the fun quotes from the movie. And I love the like Bond, that the calm before the storm moment where Bond and M are talking. I read your obituary of me, and appalling. I knew you'd hate it. I did call
Yeah.
you an exemplar of British fortitude. James Bond saying, "Well, that bit was all right."
Yeah.
Like it's just a great dynamic between these two characters that we get to just see so many different layers of in so many different like her final sentiment to him and her dying words of like, at least I did something right, I
Right.
think is such a powerful, not only
Beautiful.
just for the like the relationship between M and Bond, but specifically for the relationship between Judi Dench's M and Daniel Craig's Bond that we've seen over the course of these three movies, is a far cry from her second guessing why she gave him 00 status in Casino Royale, and then coming around to him in Quantum of Solace, and then here just fully embracing and saying like, yeah, she did get this one thing right with him.
Right. I mean, she's mother, she's mommy, as Silva repeatedly calls her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that own twisted relationship that they have there, right? Like I think, you know, so much of the end of this movie and the Skyfall Lodge stuff, I think, is just so beautifully done and so poignant. And I think that
Are you okay? Or are you hurt? Just my pride. I always was a terrible shot.
right, yeah, like or even like Kincaid and Bond, right? Like when they go target practice and Kincaid's like, remember what I told you, like make sure you don't have it go like too far left kind of thing, and then Bond fucking knocks them both out and he goes, what is your occupation again? And like Bond just like walks away, doesn't answer. Like I think it is such a perfect place to end a Bond movie, right? To bring it back to kind of the ancestral home of the Bond family and to Skyfall. And Scotland is such a great underutilized Bond location. Like, cause it is so kind of ominous and spooky, and the way the clouds can kind of come in, the nighttime, just being out in the middle of nowhere. And like also the fact that like sort of unique for a Bond movie, this movie sort of flips the script, right? And like it is Bond globetrotting at the beginning, and then the entire last half of the movie at least is all set in the UK, right? Like it sort of flips the usual template of like we're in England and then we go off to the rest of the world kind of thing. And this one is very much like, no, we're back at home, because it is a much more personal story, obviously. And yeah, like the images, like the shot of like Silva walking into the chapel, right, and like looking at Bond's parents' gravestone, right, and then just kind of smiling and then walking in. The kind of idea you have when Bond gets there and M is dying in his arms, like his parents are like 5 feet away, right? Like their graves are right outside this church, right? And he's losing his other parental figure right now, kind of in his arms. I think it's just so beautiful. The attack and fight sequence itself, like you said, is a wonderful Home Alone inspired kind of booby trap sequence. I love the fact that the DB5 gets like one last moment of glory here. And then just the kind of never ending wave of people from Silver who kind of feel like they just keep coming and coming and coming. The destruction of the house, Bond's line, of course, of like, I never liked it anyway. The ice sequence, which I think is like a great, really brutal kind of underwater fight, and Bond setting up the flare to kind of see his way back out. Like, it is all, I mean, like I said it in my, I think, 007 review, it is all so like operatic, right? And both larger than life and so incredibly like intimate and personal at the same time that like in so many other directors and performers' hands, I think it could have been really overdone. But Sam Mendes has such a craft, I think, for like drama, right? And like character arcs and like making something really personal and really intimate. And that is done in spades in the final Skyfall Lodge sequence. And then, yeah, the film itself wrapping up, again, bringing it back to M's old office. Like when I watched that for the first time, and I still like the idea now in my head of like, you can sort of view these three movies of Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, and Skyfall are essentially, instead of being their own separate timeline, are like the first three Bond movies, and like Mallory's actually just Bernard Lee's M, right? And then like they just carry over in that same office. Like because it ends just like on that note, and it's such a cool, smart idea to be like, oh, here's a nice full circle kind of thing. Again, why I said it would have been like a good both in for Craig's Bond, a good in for like the Bond movie arc. And we'll get to the other two Daniel Craig movies, but for me, I really do think this is just like the ending of Daniel Craig's run as James Bond. And to tie it back into Goldfinger one last time, right? Like, you had Casino Royale, you had Quantum of Solace be these kind of back-to-back sequels, just like Dr. No and From Russia with Love were. And then they said for the third one, let's just make something completely unrelated to those that is just a great Bond story. And I think Goldfinger and this both do it in spades. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. Trevor, any final thoughts before we wrap into the wrap-up here for Skyfall?
The only like the last dumb little thing that I'll give a nod to is the British Bulldog tchotchke, which watching it this time around, I was like, oh, it's the dice moment from The Last Jedi, but they took a moment in the movie to set up that this was a thing that Bond didn't like. So it's a fun little passing of the torch beat versus like the dice in Last Jedi, where it's like, okay, that's like a super deep cut, kind of, but it doesn't really have any like emotional resonance to the audience. Here, it doesn't really have any emotional resonance, but they took 30 seconds earlier in the movie to set up this as a thing that Bond and M have a relationship with.
Right, yeah.
So cool.
I also like it for Moneypenny's line of, I think it means you should take an office job, and him like, it's quite the opposite actually.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is another smart kind of moment.
Yeah. And I love, I was reading the trivia, M's name ultimately I think was revealed because because that prop that box had her name on it. And it was like revealed in like an auction, a prop auction later on or something like that. And so because it had been set up or established in like a prior thing, but not, or like it was, I think in like a draft during one of the Brosnan era ones or something, like her name was written in there. But this was basically like, they actually put her name onto the prop, the contents of so-and-so's name. I forget what the name was. But it was like that's what a weird little way to like have M's real name revealed to the world. Oh, like they put it on a prop, not thinking that would actually like, knowing specifically that it would never be picked up on camera, but they did it there for like the authenticity of of the moment kind of thing.
Same with like Bond's passport is shown, right?
Yeah,
it has like his date of birth on there, right? And
yeah,
which is Daniel Craig's. He's the same age as Daniel Craig. Go figure.
Yeah,
they just made it that same year.
Yeah, but I saw that in the trivia too. Like it's a very like it's an authentic passport, but it will flag as like do not accept these credentials.
Which is James Bond. Don't let him in.
Yeah. So yeah. And I also want to give a shout out to the way they handle Mallory as like the introduction to him as like antagonistic towards M, but he's talking about how he's there to like ease the transition. And then like obviously he kind of takes a bullet for her quite literally. And even before that, like Moneypenny in their scene in Macau kind of gives the little backstory of like he was and Bond knew it, he'd done his research, he'd done his homework, but like he was held by the IRA, kind of like his backstory, his history, and his like CV basically. And then I love the moment that we get Q and Tanner talking about how they're very close to the chest, leading like breadcrumbs for Silva, and Mallory comes in, immediately recognizes what's going on, and basically like signs off on it, gives them the okay. And yeah, I think it makes him a like, oh, he's gonna be the cool boss, we'll be okay. Kind of I think that will not necessarily like, not that it won't play out well, but I think the relationship of like that we get between Bond and M at the end of this movie is going to be very interesting. going into especially No Time to Die, and their more contentious relationship by that point in time. But yeah, it was just like I thought they did a really good job of setting Ralph Fiennes up for success in the role here, with as opposed to, like, they effectively did a better version of what they did with John Cleese, kind of setting up to take over the role of Q. Like a lot of the same kind of things of like, let's just establish his character in a prior movie, and then, you know, eventually if we need him, he'll take over the role. And I think they just do a more fleshed out version of that, knowing that M was not going to be around, or knowing that Judi Dench, that this was going to be her last movie. I thought they did a great job that makes the transition into the next movie just that much easier.
100%.
If they need, yeah.
I mean, I totally agree, and I think also they have a much more sense of lineage here, right, and carrying over this connective tissue, obviously, because Moneypenny and Q also are going to carry over to the next two films. I think one of the issues with Spectre in particular is it is the Bond movie that I think is most inflicted with like the MCUification of movies and it trying to world build too big. But I think the elements that work well are how it set up, you know, Gareth Mallory's character, and how it set up Moneypenny here, and how it set up Q, and how they carry forward. And while I would have probably rather had this be Daniel Craig's actual final Bond movie and the ending, instead of the two other endings we're going to get, because each movie from this point onwards was originally envisioned as, you know, arguably his last one. I'm glad that we got to see more of him with these characters, because I think he's got such great chemistry with Naomi Harris as Moneypenny, and such great chemistry with Ben Whishaw. And I also just put Ben Whishaw on anything because I love him. And then obviously him and Mallory have such a great dynamic and such a great bond. And when I first watched the movie, I actually thought it was one of those elements of like, I can't tell if he's going to be like, you know, a guy who seems like a good guy, eventually he's going to like go bad and be working for Silver this whole time kind of thing. Like it had like that sort of dynamic arc to me, like a character we're going to see next week. And so I was just sort of like, I'm not sure if this is the route they're going or not. And so when it is revealed that he takes the bullet, and I was much more kind of like, all right, yeah, like he's probably a good guy then. And then obviously the reveal at the end that he's M, I was like, oh wow, okay, like I wasn't expecting that, obviously, because I wasn't expecting them to necessarily have committed to killing off M and then replacing her with him. And so it was like, wow, that's a really cool decision to see, like it in world in the same movie all kind of be set up like that. And I think it just shows a level of like thought and care put into Skyfall, I think. But let's wrap this up. Let's run through the final categories here, Trevor. First up, we've of course got our villains corner list, with the top 5 on that right now being Alec Trevelyan's 006, Franz Sanchez from License to Kill, Ark Goldfinger from Goldfinger, Lashif from Casino Royale, and Xena Anatop from Goldeneye. Trevor, how did you like Raul Silva in Skyfall?
I mean, Javier Bardem, phenomenal in this. And the fact that it is a personal vendetta with characters that we know, puts it like immediately shoots it into Alec Trevelyan territory for me.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, do I like Silva's vendetta with M more than I like Alec's vendetta with James, and to a lesser extent M, I guess. And I think ultimately I love that Silva is coming at it from a, like, he has such a very personal like history, and as a result he knows all the tips and tricks kind of thing in the same way that Alec did. And I just think he plays off of everyone better and gets more to do with everyone, versus Alec, who really we only saw deal with James. So yeah, Silva gets the number 1 spot for me.
Yeah, Silva is easily my favorite Bond villain. I think he runs because so many great Bond villains before him walked, right? Like he he gets to walk in the footsteps of villains like Dr. No, who we have low on our combined list, but like does have great kind of like menacing, like in the shadows moments, right? And villains like Goldfinger, right? Like his whole scene with Bond tied up in the chair has to me like shades of "Do you expect me to talk? No, I expect you to die" from Goldfinger, right? Like that whole sequence of Bond strapped to the table and with the laser on him, right? And he's got the personal nature of someone like Franz Sanchez, who's one of our favorite Bond villains, or Alex Trevelyan as a like former 00 turned bad guy now, right? And then he's almost got this like dynamic with M of Electra King, right? This personal kind of feud between the two of them because of what happened in their kind of personal life. And so he takes so many elements of all of the best Bond villains while ignoring basically everything from the Roger Moore era, because it's pretty weak mostly, and just delivers. I mean, I guess he takes the parts from Scaramanga, right, of being this great assassin and great fighter, right, and just crafts, I think, such a great, menacing, unnerving, creepy Bond villain that strikes so many right notes and is so perfectly suited to this Bond and this Bond movie. And it should also be said, I just think that Javier Bardem is extremely talented. Obviously, he's an Oscar winner, and it in any other actor's catalog, this will probably be the thing they're most known for, and it is a testament to the quality of acting of Javier Bardem that this is just one of the things he is known for now, right? And one of his best performances, because I think his performance here is just like really extraordinary, right? And like spoiler for my like written review, it's going to be a 10 out of 10. Obviously, his performance, I just think it's so good. And we had talked before about like there are certain Bond villains who get introduced really late into the thing, and because of that, I always just wish I had more of him. And I wish I had more of Silva, but like he uses every single second he gets to its absolute fullest extent.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. He's easily my favorite Bond villain. And I think, as we've touched on, there are a lot of similarities to Goldfinger in this Bond movie. I think there are also a lot to Goldeneye. And those are two pretty good movies to be compared to.
Yeah, and even though he's not physically introduced until late into the movie,
mid-act,
like he is like we get to see his almost playful nature with how he kind of leaves the breadcrumbs and the little taunting messages. Yeah, I mean to a degree, yeah. But yeah, he's like the little hacking kind of like silly faces that he's putting M's face on money or whatever in the
jackpot thing,
suffer for your sins or whatever. Yeah, like those little things, like they fall perfectly in line with the character that we meet an hour plus into the movie, as like, oh yeah, I can easily see him doing those things. And it wasn't until we were talking about it here, like I found myself like thinking, oh, like there's that moment in the final Skyfall sequence where he's like, he wants M to like kill them both with one bullet.
Yeah.
Rather than like just kill her outright or take her own life or whatever. And it wasn't until you mentioned and kind of called back to like the cyanide, like he was ready for his life to be done 5 months into that torture thing. So he is suicidal from that point on, basically. But at that, like when the cyanide doesn't do the trick, now he's maybe still suicidal, but he wants to take M with him. And so like it was a like, oh, that's a like I hadn't put those two beats together in my mind until kind of discussing, and I think that's an interesting like headspace for that character to be in, because if he like if he kills M in there and then like walks out of Skyfall, he has nothing left to do. Like his objective is complete. So now he just like, he's not just gonna go about his day kind of thing. So like he almost goes to Skyfall, and in the same way that like if he had gotten his mission and he killed M in the hearing, he probably wasn't walking out of that hearing.
I don't think he expected to, right? He just sort of like got away with it, right? Like I think you also see that in the fact that easy to miss, but like one of the instructions he gives to his like henchmen when they arrive is like, don't kill her, like save her for me kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like I totally think his intention was to basically have him kill them both essentially, right? Or either that or kill her and then kill himself, right? Like I think, because again, it's also important to remember that like he got captured when Hong Kong got transferred over, which I kind of referenced was in 97.
Yeah.
So 15 years he's been planning this revenge, right? Like, so like, I think when you plan this, 15-year long revenge thing, that you have all these plans mapped out, and the underground thing mapped out for years and years and years in advance, like that is the thing that is keeping you alive. That's the thing that's keeping you going and driving you forward, right? And so once you complete that, I don't think he had a like escape plan in mind. I think it was like, this is what we're gonna do, and then the rest of my guys can just bugger off, I guess, right? And like I also think it's interesting because like to tie it back into like its theme of like the decline of Britain and like the state of England, that they chose like the transfer of Hong Kong and 97, because that is the date that a lot of people like ascribe to as like the official end of like the British Empire was the transfer of Hong Kong to China, right? It's like even that moment is like symbolic in its own way as well within the larger story of like the nature of England.
Yeah, and tying it back to this being the first Bond villain that that like gets his way, that like wins. It's also the first Bond villain in the Craig era that like Daniel Craig actually kills, because Le Chiffre.
That's right. It's weird. You're right.
Yeah, Le Chiffre and the guy who I've already forgotten from last week were killed by their own men, or killed by Quantum.
Even expanding out to all 5 movies, it's going to be the only Daniel Craig villain that is intentionally killed by Daniel Craig, I'll say at least, until like, because unintentional no time to die spoilers, I guess, but like unintentionally kills him. But yeah, that's really interesting, Trevor. You're right. Like I also think Silva stands out too because Dominic Green is so forgettable, and like even like Le Chiffre is great, but like he is not of the same caliber of like some of the other great Bond villains, I think, because he is just in it for like the second act essentially. And so like this is like the first great Bond villain of the Craig era, and in some ways the only one. But that's for the next 2 weeks. But yes, Raul Silva is our new number 1, displacing Alec Trevelyan, who follows the 2, and then Sanchez, Goldfinger, and Le Chiffre. God, Fran Sanchez really is great. I should watch License to Kill again. That movie's so good, Trevor. That takes us to those musical moments. I'm just going to assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're going to agree on this as well. What are your thoughts on Skyfall by Adele?
I mean, I see you putting it in the docket number 1.
I'm just putting it in the top. I'm like in the list, not ranking it yet.
I would say, while this is easily the most iconic of like the modern era songs.
Oh, 5, sure. The weird Sam Smith.
And like this is the one that I can like still a couple days later like remember and hum and like know the rhythm to. I still think Live and Let Die and Nobody Does It Better from Spy Who Loved Me, because they just crossed over into pop culture more so. Like Skyfall, as great as Adele isn't going to cross over into like broader, like we're not going to be hearing Skyfall pop up in like other movies or something 10 years from now. It's still largely like confined to a Bond movie in terms of like its ultimate musical relevance. And so then it now becomes like Skyfall versus Goldfinger, and I feel like Goldfinger for me still probably surpasses Skyfall a little bit, just because Goldfinger has clearly like stood the test of time, and even if I hadn't seen Goldfinger the movie, I knew Goldfinger the song, and I knew Shirley Bassey as a person because of Goldfinger the song. Whereas like Adele, I know from Adele's other work, and this is just like a cool footnote in her career. Not even a footnote, a cool like moment in her career, but it's still like pales in comparison to like I have the album 21 on my phone kind of thing, and can pull that up if I want to hear some like banger Adele tracks. And Skyfall's not the song I'm gonna listen to if I want to go listen to some Adele. But like, yeah, I think of the modern era, going all the way back to the Brosnan stuff, this is easily like the best song.
Oh yeah.
Even if Die Another Day is going to be a little more catchy, just because
Die Another Day is great. I mean, I am glad that you like Die Another Day. That makes me happy.
Yeah, I mean, like the Madonna hook
Madonna,
of
like,
it,
techno,
and the like, the modern pop phenomenon of, well, if we just say the hook a million times, it's going to, by its very nature, be catchy. So it just makes it like it is an earworm by design. Skyfall less so, and you know, I think is a better song all around. But for me, I think ultimately I put this probably under Goldfinger. If 30 years from now I think of Skyfall more than I think of Goldfinger, that can easily be switched, but I think Goldfinger has stood the test of time more than I think Skyfall will. Skyfall, the movie will, continue to stand the test of time just like Goldfinger has, but I don't know if I'll, 30 years from now be thinking back on like iconic Bond themes and think, oh yeah, that moment in 2012 where Skyfall was playing on the radio was clearly a big moment. I don't think that movie or that song is still going to be playing, 5-10 years from now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. Usually you cede it to me. This time I'm going to cede it to you. That's totally fair. I totally agree with that. I mean, Live and Let Die is the best Bond song. That's just like a great song, period. I mean, come on, that's Live and Let Die. I was surprised by Nobody Does It Better, but Nobody Does It Better is a great song. I also have no objections there. Those are both made by great artists.
It's again Nobody Does It Better, not necessarily like Nobody Does It Better. I never knew was a Bond song until we did this podcast. I've heard that song so many other times in so many other movies and contexts and stuff.
It's a great
because
song.
It is not confined to like it's the thing that I think, fortunately the last couple Bond movies have gotten to do. They didn't have to like sandwich in the name of the movie. Like if that song had been called The Spy Who Loved Me, nobody would know that song here in 2022. The fact that it's Nobody Does It Better and has been able to be kind of like the broader themes of it have been able to be used in other pop culture references and stuff, I think have helped it stand the test of time more so than any Bond specific themes.
Yeah, I agree. I have no objections. Skyfall will be fourth on our list. And then, as you mentioned, Die Another Day is the other element of the top 5. In the Q-Lab sequence, we got gadgets back. We don't hate them anymore, guys. It's lit. We get a gun. We find out that radios are neat for good guys and bad guys. And we get, of course, the DB5 packed with stuff. I'm just happy we got gadgets again, Trevor, honestly. That's my big takeaway from the Q-Lab. They start small. They'll start to build a little bit, but I think the entire sequence between Ben Whishal's Q and Bond at the art museum, even down to like discussing what they see in the picture on the wall, is just all great, and it is such a good, fun, refreshing sequence to have Q back in a Bond movie. That takes us on, Trevor, to the final review and ranking. What are your thoughts, and where do you rank Skyfall?
So obviously Skyfall, I knew going into this whole thing, Skyfall was most likely going to be in my top 5 kind of at the end. Where it was going to fall in relationship to like a nostalgic pull like GoldenEye. Like the Timothy Dalton like surprise hits for me.
Hell yeah.
Going like rewatching Casino Royale was like just such a standout. And rewatching this one again, a standout, and like much like Casino Royale serves as like a great standalone story. Like if Casino Royale had never been followed up on, that's still a perfect encapsulation of the character kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think this one, the fact that they, take a detour from the broader Spectrum, Quantum, whatever, Spectre, Quantum Solace kind of stuff, and just make it a very personal Bond story and a very personal M story, just adds so much emotional weight and heft to this that it gets my number 1. So it's gonna knock Tomorrow Never Dies out of my top 5. But yeah, my top 5 is now gonna be Skyfall. It's been fun. Basically, it like in the last couple months, just having like new number one.
I know, it's been great, right? Yeah.
So yeah, Skyfall's my number 1, Casino Royale number 2, GoldenEye number 3, License to Kill, and Living Daylights rounding out 4 and 5.
Kill more than Living Daylights.
Yeah.
I definitely need to watch License to Kill again. Yeah, I don't disagree. Right, since 2012 when this movie came out, I've wavered a little bit, but I've mostly been of the opinion that Skyfall is my favorite Bond movie. If anything, I am most surprised just how close it is, because I think there are so many good movies. Right, from like the nostalgic pull of GoldenEye, which is currently my number 3, I think. Yeah, my number 3, to Casino Royale. Just I think in some ways for me, Casino Royale didn't have the same impact as Skyfall because it was the first one and I just was completely not ready for it, right? And it was also sort of overshadowed then by like what Skyfall would do. But getting to like watch Casino Royale just all the way through fresh for this podcast, I was really blown away by how good Casino Royale is, right? And then obviously I was similarly blown away by how much I really loved Goldfinger again upon rewatch as well. I think all 3 of those movies, I think Casino Royale, Goldfinger, and Skyfall it's sort of that thing to me of like, I feel like if you ask me on any given day, I could name any one of the 3 as my favorite James Bond movie. It sort of depends on what you're wanting. Goldfinger, I think, to me is like the perfect, fun, like charismatic, like Bond adventure movie. I think Casino Royale is just like beautiful. But I think in terms of just sheer quality of filmmaking, it is pretty hard to deny that Skyfall is the best Bond movie, right? I mean, I think Roger Deakin cinematography, I think Sam Mendes direction, I think that this to me is probably the single best Bond performance by a Bond actor in Daniel Craig. I think again, Casino Royale might be more showy, but I think here there's so much more like introspective work being done, and that delves more into like who Bond is and his backstory. I think it's easily the best performance of M, right? Like one of the true facts I didn't pull is that like she gets more screen time here than Bernard Lee did as an entire run as M.
Also, one that I saw was she gets more screen time in this movie than Desmond Llewellyn did over the course of his 17 movies.
That's a tragedy of Desmond Llewellyn.
Yeah.
Shout out to him in License to Kill, though. That was great fun. But yeah, like, and Javier Bardem, Javier Bardem is just the best villain. I love Adele's soundtrack. I love Roger Deakins' cinematography. It's got, if not my favorite shot of the Bond series, certainly one of my favorite shots. It's got some of my favorite Bond outfits. I think Bond's like Scottish outfit is great, and like such a great look. That ultimately, while it didn't, I think, surprise me how much I loved it as much as Casino Royale and Goldfinger did, it's also because I already just loved it an immense amount. And I think it's just such a expertly crafted Bond movie that, yeah, I'm ultimately totally content to finally knock Goldfinger down and have Skyfall take the top spot. I think you put it really beautifully, so I'm just going to copy you, Pace. I think it is just such a like quintessential Bond movie that even if there was no other like movie, if it was just watched in a vacuum, I think you would still get so much out of it. And I also stand by what I said for years. I do think it's just one of the best movies made in its decade. I think it's just an incredible piece of filmmaking. So yeah, Skyfall is our new respective number 1 for both of us, making my new top 5 now be Skyfall, Goldfinger, Casino Royale, GoldenEye, and Live and Let Die. That's a hell of a top 5 for both of us, Trevor. And that takes us to the end of the show. No Bond on Bond yet, because despite Daniel Craig's best wishes, they kept throwing lots of money at him, and so this is not his last Bond movie yet. But suffice it to say, he, like Roger Moore, had a great first 2 to 3 Bond movies.
Let's we haven't done this as a segment, but M on M. Where would you like? I very easily put Judi Dench as like the top of the M's. Mm-hmm. Where do you throw her compared to Bernard Lee and the other guy who I've forgotten? There you go.
Robert Brown's totally forgettable in whatever. He's bland. He's in bad Roger Moore movies and some good Timothy Dalton ones. But he's just kind of a crotchety old man. So Robert Brown is easily the weakest. I really like Bernard Lee, right? Like, I think partially it's just like those movies I grew up with and like that dynamic of Bond. So I do think Bernard Lee's a really great Bond, and I like the fact that you see like portraits of him in the background of some of the Judi Dench Bond movies with her in him, included in Skyfall is the portrait of him in one of the hallways that she's in here. And there'll be another one in No Time to Die. But I mean, I think it's pretty clearly Judi Dench, right? I think Judi Dench is just, head and shoulders above the other M's. And part of that is just she's given the ability to be, right? Like she's just given more screen time in really all of her movies.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think even like What Is Not Enough, like she's given so much to do there with Elektra and Bond. Die Another Day, she's given a lot to do with obviously Bond kind of coming back from being imprisoned. And then all three of Daniel Craig's movies, she's given just so much to work with and so much interesting material that they never really explore with Bernard Lee's M and Connery and Moore's Bond.
Yeah.
So like I think she's definitely the strongest. Like the more interesting one would be like when we get to No Time to Die and like where I would rank, Mallory's M versus like Bernard Lee, and that is a much closer conversation. But Judi Dench, I think, for Skyfall alone, I would have as my favorite one, and Ben Whishaw would be my second favorite Q as well, to do a Q on Q. I do stand by
the John Cleese could have been
really
great.
Done dirty.
Yeah.
I really do think that like I also very fresh because I had just written my Die of the Day review like 2 weeks ago, but like I do think that him and Pierce Brosnan in What Is Not Enough a little bit, but like especially in Die of the Day, they have a very Desmond Llewellyn and Sean Connery like kind of fractious relationship that I really like actually, and I would have been really interested to see more of John Cleese. And like I think he's sort of the person I feel like the most bad for in terms of like them rebooting everything and not bringing anything else back, right? Because like Samantha Bond as Moneypenny is really good with Pierce Brosnan, but like I don't need more of her.
Yeah.
But John Cleese, I think like I'd have loved to see him do a few more movies. And Desmond Llewellyn obviously is number one because he's GOAT tier.
Yeah, I agree on the Judi Dench front. Like easily a number one. In large part because she's the first M that's really given things to do. Like
right.
so
She's
much.
Also our respective M's too.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. So. There's certainly that element as well. But like going back and like watching all of the other like M stuff, like so many of those early movies, it was just like M is there just to give the mission. And then he's gone from the rest of the movie. Like he is just there for an initial exposition dump, and that's it. He like in the Mission Impossible thing, he would have just been a recording that self-destructs. And it's not until much later, like in some of those, like there's a little bit of like antagonistic banter between, but in a lot of them, there is just like there's no relationship there. It's just I'm going to give you a mission. You're going to give me bizarrely well-known facts that you, Bond, happen to know about this thing we're talking about.
It's so good.
And then we're not going to see each other until the next movie. And so I think starting with Judi Dench, like they decided giving that character a point of view could be really cool and really interesting.
Yeah, really interesting.
Starting out from like her introduction being like, I think you are an old fossil, to Pierce Brosnan,
relic of the Cold War.
And then obviously I think her integration into The World's Not Enough with Elektra King certainly like took M to a new level that then just continued on over the course of the Craig movies here. With obviously Skyfall being M's magnum opus as a character. This being as much an M movie as it is a Bond movie makes it makes her an easy like number one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, it is just her finest performance and in a career littered with him, right? Like it is no surprise to see that she got a lot of award buzz and was nominated for a lot of stuff, as was Daniel Craig from this, because they're both, and Javier Bardem, they were all three utterly fantastic in this film. And I didn't really mention that it won BAFTAs, but it won the BAFTA for Outstanding British Film, and I think it thoroughly deserved it. It's a phenomenal, great film. Again, I also think it's Daniel Craig's magnum opus as well, because I think that's like the hard thing about Skyfall. That's what makes it so fun to talk about, is that like you could look at any of those three characters and be like, God damn, like they stole this movie, and then be like, actually though, this other character, like that's the thing, like if Daniel Craig wasn't so on his A game, Javier Bardem would have just like run away with this movie, but he's given such a great person to like play off of, and then Daniel Craig can't run away with it either because Judi Dench is also here just absolutely just crushing it. And yeah, it is, again, goes back into why I think ultimately you just sort of have to name this the best Bond movie, right? Even if it is not your personal favorite one or not, like it is just operating on a whole other level in terms of just like the quality of just every element of the film. Yeah, that is Skyfall. We, spoiler, love this movie. Thank you for listening. That is the show. If you like what you heard, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite where you should already be for this YouTube exclusive series. Hit the like button, leave a little comment. Tell us what your favorite moments from Skyfall were and what you liked about the film. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell to get notified when a new video goes live Monday through Saturday over at That Nerdy Site on YouTube. You can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest written reviews, content, features, as well as podcasts that go live there Monday through Saturday, in addition, of course, to the written companion piece to this podcast. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trev, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
I will plug our That D Plus show. In the timeline of when this movie's coming out, when this episode comes out, our Obi-Wan Kenobi episodes should have been the most recent thing. So go check out our thoughts on the Obi-Wan Kenobi series premiere debut, first couple episodes over on That D Plus show.
I encourage everyone to go do it. You can go find me at LeftyLoggy. I will also echo that shout out. Go check out That D Plus show. Excited for Star Wars, the other big cinematic love of my life here, in addition to James Bond. So it's an exciting time to be me. As we're doing Bond podcasts, we did a Rebels podcast, we're going to do an Obi-Wan podcast. It's great. What a great time to be alive. It's like the summer of 2012 all over again. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site and That Bond show, we will return with Spectre.